Hello, and welcome to another edition of Musings from an Expat. During the election period, I was abroad, but I tried to keep up with what was happening with public opinion and stuff in the UK. And to do this, I kind of spent a little bit of time on Twitter. And I noticed that some people were tweeting things like, oh, this person has never had a real job, they've spent their entire life in politics, blah, blah, blah. And this sentiment has always kind of frustrated me. And so today I want to talk to you a little bit about what kind of roles people might fulfill if they choose to pursue a career in politics. So I used to work for an MP, and to start off with, I was officially employed as a caseworker. So this is sort of like, entry level. What did this mean? Well, my role was basically to answer the phone or answer letters or emails that the MP received from constituents which related to some sort of problem. Now, I worked in a constituency office, and so the problems I was dealing with were local and usually to do with practical things. So an example would be when a council tenant rings up and complains that for some reason they want a tree cut down. If this tree is on council land, then we from the MP's office get in touch with the relevant council department head, usually via an email or a letter, and kind of alert them to the problem. This problem will then be noted and hopefully the council will send someone to investigate this tree. Following an investigation, this tree will either be dealt with or not, depending on a range of factors. Either way, the council will write to us a letter basically, telling us the reasons for the decision that's been made. And we forward this letter to the constituent with a sort of like bit of follow-up advice. Basically, being a caseworker for an MP should act a little bit like the Citizens Advice Bureau. Now, my more senior colleague, the head caseworker, he'd had some specialist training, and so he was tasked with dealing with certain topics such as immigration. So where I used to work, one of the wards has a fairly sizable population of people for whom immigration is quite an important issue. And we had a case where a person was, I think they were in their late 20s, born in this country, had always worked, paid taxes and all this sort of thing, but for some reason had never applied for a passport. This person called us when their initial passport application was rejected because the Home Office tried to claim that technically this person was not a British citizen. So this meant that we had to go out and find basically how they could become a British citizen and who would be best to speak to about these sorts of problems. I know this doesn't sound terribly glamorous, and it's not, but to say that people who work in politics are out of touch with the concerns of ordinary people, it's not really fair, I don't think. It is true that some MPs are better than others. Certainly the one I used to work for was much better than the MP one constituency over, who, whenever we rang his office, as obviously we occasionally had to do, we only ever got through to an answering machine. Now, as I mentioned, I was employed as a caseworker at the beginning, but as the sort of 2015 election got closer, I started to spend more time on other activities. So one of those activities was maintaining a couple of databases. So one of these databases was basically a glorified mailing list of all our party supporters. The second was a bit more sophisticated. It was essentially the electoral register. So every adult who's registered to vote has to provide a name and address of where they live. MPs and other organisations can then buy these lists to see who lives in their constituency or whatever. This software allowed us to add extra data that we collected over time. So if, for example, a constituent signed a petition, which we were organising, we make a little note of that, and at the appropriate time we send out a letter to everyone who's interested, informing them of the progress that's been made in relation to whatever the cause is. This database also contains information such as telephone numbers and voting intentions. But importantly, we can only store this information if you've given it to us. Like, we can't just buy your phone number, like, you have to give it to us. Over time, we fill in more and more details until eventually this database is kind of populated. This also helps MPs keep track of salient issues within the constituency. So if, for example, lots of people sign a petition to, I don't know, save a post office, for example, this will be noted in the software. Again, it's not really glamorous, but I'm just making a point that we don't just sit around, drinking tea and eating biscuits. Now, another part of what my job was to do was to ring up party members or supporters and ask them to volunteer for us. So if we needed leaflets delivering, for example, we'd ask people who lived in those areas, or if we were door knocking in their neighbourhood, we'd ask them to come with us. And this leads me to the next kind of point. Technically, I was paid by the state, so I wasn't allowed to do party work on state time, if you know what I mean. So we did it outside of normal office hours. And we didn't get that time back in the form of time off or anything. So, technically your contract says, you work 38 hours, but in reality you actually do work more. But anyway, up until about 8 weeks before the election, we spent at least 2 hours a week extra door knocking. Sometimes we were asking people to sign petitions, sometimes we're just kind of trying to gauge voting intentions. But we're always asking people that, the first thing that you say when you knock on the door is, "Hi, my name is whatever, I work for, whoever you work for. Are there any concerns that you want to talk to us about today?" Again, this isn't really glamorous, but realistically we spoke to a lot of people in those sessions. And to say that we didn't know what people were thinking simply isn't true. Now, as the election drew closer, we did more and more canvassing. All of this is fairly standard. This is kind of like the bread and butter work of an MP. But what does an MP actually do during the campaign? Or more accurately, what does someone who works in politics do during a campaign? So, like I said, caseworkers like me aren't technically allowed to canvass because we're employed by the state. So during the short campaign, we technically go on holiday. Now, my office was good because generally we had at least one person in the office at all times doing casework related work. But the rest of us were sort of like full election mode. So for me, I was basically turned into the literature distribution manager. So it's my role to make sure that any campaign literature that my boss wanted distributing got posted. So I was calling volunteers, asking them for a regular commitment to deliver at least one batch of leaflets or letters or whatever a week for the whole 6-week campaign. So once we had a group of sort of regular volunteers signed up, we had to get these leaflets to the volunteers. So this meant me physically having to drive around the constituency delivering bundles of whatever it was to our volunteers. So not to bore you particularly with statistics or anything, but just to point out again that I wasn't doing nothing. Bearing in mind the constituency is only 7 miles long or something. I drove over 300 miles delivering leaflets to different people in that short space of time. And I eventually learned where all of my volunteers live and could drive that route without GPS, which I know doesn't sound a big deal, but I'm not actually from that town, so it was quite a big deal for me. And I also want to get in a cheeky brag that by the weekend before the election, the system was so good that we managed to deliver 30,000 leaflets over that weekend, so roughly one to every house in the constituency. Now, these are fairly obvious tasks, but there are also obviously backroom factors that you don't really think about. So every time you want to deliver a letter, for example, the letter first has to be written, has to be printed, which we did in-house, has to be stuffed into envelopes, which again we did in-house, and then bundled into special delivery rounds, which again was done in-house. And trust me, these are all extremely time-consuming activities, but we still managed to put on at least 3 door knocking sessions every day because of the way that work was distributed. We knocked on every single door in the constituency at least, I think it was 2 or 3 times. And on election day, we estimated that we had roughly 12,000 voters. So we knocked on every single one of those doors on election day, just on election day, to make sure that no matter who they voted for, they voted. I remember I got back into the office at about 8 PM, having started knocking on doors at about 9 AM. And my boss, the MP, took a phone into the corner office where we worked, and he was phoning up potential voters until about 9 PM, until one of my more senior colleagues, went and basically said, it's not appropriate to call people at this time. Come on. Now, I could also explain to you some of the other things that we did on election night, and we could talk about some of this other sort of statistical wizardry, basically, that we did during the campaign. But it isn't really the point of this vlog. I just wanted to say that people who say, this person has spent their life in politics, what do they know about ordinary people? Well, I don't think this is the right way to look at it. People who spend their lives in politics are dedicated public servants. You may not agree with their politics, and you may think their policies are mad or bad or mean or crazy or whatever, but you can't accuse them of not being aware of their constituents. And you may think that some MPs are arrogant, and of course they are. But so are all humans, basically. It's not the lack of opportunity to meet people, it's just that some people are nicer than others, some people are more willing to listen than others. But yeah, the point that I just wanted to make was that we do talk to people, and this accusation that he's never had a real job because he works in politics is just totally unfair. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. If you have any thoughts, comments, or suggestions for future videos, please let me know below. Also, if you want me to make a follow-up video, such as what we do on election night, or more details on what we did during a short campaign, or whatever, I will be happy to put something together and put it up here. So thank you once again for watching, and have a good day. Ciao!